A round of applause for them as they come on stage.
The chief guest, the headmistress, the adjudicators, our distinguished guests, you're most welcome to this day. My name is Kemigisha Mariam from Yellow East House, and I'm introducing Nagginda Maisoon, who will present a speech that was presented by Nelson Mandela on the 19th April 1964. Nelson Mandela delivered this statement at the opening of the defense trial in the Rivonia case. Your Honor, members of the court, ladies and gentlemen, you are all welcome to the trial of the leader of the anarchist movement that is causing mayhem to the peaceful Republic of South Africa. The accused is the leader of the African National Congress, a crusader for the freedom of the South Africans, and is standing trial for treason. He is being accused of plotting to overthrow the apartheid government, recruiting persons to undertake guerrilla warfare against the South African state, conspiring to aid foreign military against the Republic of South Africa, and furthering acts of communism. The defendant has been charged with treason, and he is here to plead that he is not guilty. The defendant has the right to remain silent, but he has chosen to speak in his own defense. I ask that you listen to the defendant's statement with an open mind, and that you consider all the evidence in making your decision. His name is Nelson Mandela.
I am the first accused. I hold a bachelor's degree in arts and practiced as an attorney in Johannesburg for a number of years in partnership with Oliver Tambo. I am a convicted prisoner serving 5 years for leaving the country without a permit and for inciting people to go on strike at the end of May 1961. At the outset, I want to say that the suggestion made by the state in its opening that the struggle in South Africa is under the influence of foreigners or communists is wholly incorrect. I have done whatever I did, both as an individual and as a leader of my people, because of my experience in South Africa and my proudly felt African background, and not because of what any outsider might have said. In my youth in the Transkei, I listened to the elders of my tribe telling stories of the old days. Amongst the tales they related to me were those of wars fought by our ancestors in the defense of the fatherland. The names of Dingane and Bambata, Hinsa and Makana, Skungdi and Dalasile, Moshweshwe and Sekukune were all praised as the glory of the entire African nation. I hoped then that my life might offer me the opportunity to serve my people and make my own humble contribution to their freedom struggle. This is what has motivated me in all that I have done in relation to the charges made against me in this case. Having said this, I must deal immediately and at some length with the question of violence. Some of the things so far told to the court are true and some are untrue. I do not, however, deny that I planned sabotage. I did not plan it in a spirit of recklessness, nor because I have any love for violence. I planned it as a result of a calm and sober assessment of the political situation that had arisen after many years of tyranny, exploitation, and oppression of my people by the whites. I admit immediately that I was one of the persons who helped to form Umkhonto weSizwe, and that I played a prominent role in its affairs until I was arrested in August 1962. In the statement which I am about to make, I shall correct certain false impressions created by state witnesses. Amongst other things, I will demonstrate that certain of the acts referred to in this evidence were not and could not have been committed by Umkhonto. I will also deal with the relationship between the African National Congress and Umkhonto and the part that I personally have played in the affairs of both these organizations. I shall deal also with the Communist Party. To explain these matters properly, I will have to explain what Umkhonto set out to achieve, what methods it prescribed for the achievement of these objects, and why these methods were chosen. I will also have to explain how I became involved in the activities of these organizations. I deny that Umkhonto was responsible for a number of acts which clearly fell outside the policy of the organization and have been used in the indictment against us. I do not know what justification there was for these acts, but to demonstrate that they could not have been authorized by Umkhonto, I want to refer briefly to the roots and policy of the organization. I already mentioned that I was one of the persons who helped to form Umkhonto. I and the others who started this organization did so for two reasons. Firstly, we believe that as a result of government policy, violence by the African people had become inevitable, and that unless responsible leadership was given to canalize and control the feelings of our people, there would be outbreaks of terrorism, which would produce an intensity of bitterness and hostility between the various races of the country, which is not even produced by war. Secondly, we felt that without violence, there would be nowhere open to the African people to succeed in their struggle against the principle of white supremacy. All lawful modes of expressing opposition to this principle had been closed by legislation, and we were placed in a position in which we either had to accept a permanent state of inferiority or to defy the government. We chose to defy the law. We first broke the law in a way that avoided any recourse to violence. When this form was legislated against and the government chose a show of force to crush opposition to its policies, only then did we decide to answer violence with violence. But the violence we chose to adopt was not terrorism. We who formed Umkhonto were all members of the African National Congress and had behind us the policy of nonviolence and negotiation as a means of solving political disputes. We believed that South Africa belonged to all the people who live in it and not to one group, be it black or white. We did not want an interracial war and tried to avoid it to the last minute. If the court is in doubt about this, it will be seen that the whole history of our organization bears out what I have said and what I will subsequently say when I describe the tactics Umkhonto decided to adopt. I want, therefore, to say something about the African National Congress. The African National Congress was formed in 1912 to defend the rights of the African people, which had seriously been curtailed by the South African Act and were being threatened by the Native Land Act. For 37 years, that's until 1949, it adhered strictly to constitutional struggle. It put forward demands and resolutions. It sent delegations to the government in the belief that African grievances could be solved through peaceful discussions and that Africans could advance gradually to full political rights. But white governments remained unmoved, and the rights of the African people were seen to become less instead of becoming greater. In the words of my leader, Chief Lutuli, who became president of the ANC and who was later awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, who will deny that 30 years of my life have been spent knocking in vain, patiently, moderately, and modestly at a closed and barred door? What have been the fruits of moderation? The past 30 years have seen the greatest number of laws restricting our rights and progress. Until today, we have reached a stage where we have almost no rights at all. Even after 1949, the ANC remained determined to avoid violence. At this time, however, there was a change in the strictly constitutional means of protests which were employed in the past. The change was embodied in a decision which was taken to protest against apartheid legislation by peaceful but unlawful demonstrations against certain laws. Pursuant to this policy, the ANC launched the Defiance campaign, in which I was placed in charge of volunteers. The campaign was based on the principle of passive resistance. More than 8,500 people defied apartheid laws and went to jail. Yet there was not a single instance of violence on the part of any defier. I and 19 colleagues were convicted for the role which we played in organizing the campaign, but our sentences were suspended mainly because the judge found that discipline and non-violence had been stressed throughout. This was a time when the volunteer section of the ANC was first established and when the word Amadela Kufa was first used. This was the time when volunteers were asked to take pledges to uphold certain principles. Evidence dealing with volunteers has been brought into this case, but completely out of context. The volunteers were not and are not soldiers of a black army pledged to fight a civil war against the whites. They were and are dedicated workers prepared to lead campaigns initiated by the ANC, to distribute leaflets, to organize strikes, and to do whatever that particular campaign required. They are called volunteers because they volunteer to face the penalties of imprisonment and whipping, which are now prescribed by the legislature for such acts. During the Defiance campaign, the Public Safety Act and the Criminal Law Amendment Act were passed. These statutes provided harsher penalties for offenses committed by way of protests. Despite this, the protests continued and the ANC adhered to its policy of non-violence. In 1956, 156 leading members of the Congress Alliance, including myself, were arrested on a charge of high treason and charges under the Suppression of Communism Act. We were arrested under the Suppression of Communism Act. The non-violent policy of the ANC was put into issue by the government, but when the court gave its judgment some 5 years later, it found that the ANC did not have a policy of violence. We were acquitted on all counts, which included the count that the ANC sought to set up a communist state in place of the existing regime. The government has always sought to label its opponents as communists. This allegation has been repeated in the present case, but as I will show you, the ANC is not and never has been a communist organization. In 1960, there was a shooting at Jabville which resulted in the proclamation of a state of emergency and the declaration of the ANC as an unlawful organization. My colleagues and I, after careful consideration, decided that we would not obey this decree. The African people were not part of the government and did not make the laws by which they were governed. We believed in the words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the will of the people shall be the basis of authority of the government, and for us to accept the banning was equivalent to accepting the silencing of Africans for all time. The ANC refused to dissolve, but instead went underground. We believed that it was our duty to preserve this organization, which had been built up with almost 50 years of unremitting toil. I have no doubt that no self-respecting white organization would disband itself if declared illegal by a government it had no say. In 1960, the government held a referendum which led to the establishment of the Republic. Africans, who constituted approximately 70% of the South African population, were not entitled to vote and were not even consulted about the proposed constitutional change. All of us were apprehensive of our future under the proposed White Republic, and a resolution was taken to hold an all-in-African conference to call for a national convention and to organize mass demonstrations at the eve of the Republic if the government failed to call for that convention. The conference was attended by Africans of various political persuasions. I was the secretary of the conference and undertook to be responsible for the national stay-at-home, which was subsequently called to coincide with the declaration of the Republic. As all strikes by the African people were illegal, the person organizing the strike had to avoid arrest. I was chosen to be this person, and I consequently had to leave my home and my family and my practice and go into hiding to avoid arrest. The stay-at-home, in accordance to the ANC policy, was to be a peaceful demonstration. Careful instructions were given to organizers and members to avoid any recourse to violence. The government's answer to this was to introduce new and harsher laws, to mobilize armed forces, and to send Saracens, armed vehicles and soldiers into townships in a massive show of force designed to intimidate the people. This was an indication that the government had chosen to rule by force alone, and this decision was a milestone to the road to Umkhonto. Some of this may appear irrelevant to this trial. In fact, I believe none of it is irrelevant because it will, I hope, enable the court to appreciate the attitudes eventually adopted by the various persons and bodies concerned in the national liberation movement. During my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination. I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. This is an ideal for which I am prepared to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.